But again, he predicts the scientific religiousness pretty accurately in here, even just in the brief introduction. He distinguishes between realism and agnosticism.
Mm-hmm.
And each of those, again, he divides into naive versus critical. Oh man, my class yesterday was pretty tough, but I was very happy with my performance.
Oh, you mean jiu-jitsu?
Yeah.
Were you sparring, or I don't know if that's the term.
Yeah, the whole class, like, we hit the ground running right away. We did drills, which is like sparring, but which is like sparring, but with a certain rule. Like, okay, as soon as someone scores a point, you reset, or you start from side control, and as soon as somebody submits or takes a mount, you switch, and the other person starts side control. But then the second half was normal sparring also. But I rolled with this other blue belt in the beginning, and at one point I got so out of breath I had to take a break. I was so out of breath. Hasn't happened to me in a long time.
Well, glad you met a match. Can you check can you check our YouTube and Odyssey to see how they're doing?
Yeah.
They look like they're doing fine. I'll say some stuff so some stuff can come through on the stream so you can hear it and see if it's correctly or not.
No, I heard your cough on YouTube, and Odyssey. I have to go to Odyssey itself. Okay, say something.
Saying something. I don't know how long it's going to take for the delay, but I am now saying something.
It's choppy on Odyssey.
Well, let me reset the audio engine. I haven't done that yet. Okay, I just restarted that.
Say something.
Wait, you don't like my whistling? Bonus points if you could tell me what that's from, what I'm whistling. We'll see if we're the same culture or not, Nima.
Whistle again.
You don't know? You don't know?
Oh,
It's Final Fantasy bullshit.
okay.
It's a song from Final Fantasy 3
I,
or 6 if you're depending on what side of the world you're on. Final Fantasy bullshit.
I love Final Fantasy 3. That was my favorite, I
Oh,
think.
that was
So,
the Chocobo song. When you're riding around on a Chocobo?
yeah, it was. It's been a while. Maybe
Okay.
I don't remember the sound. So
Okay, we are the same culture then. We can fight on the same side
yeah, I
of the
think
war now.
Final Fantasy just got progressively more and more
Retarded.
Skittles-ish.
Yeah. It died at Final
But
Fantasy 8. Final Fantasy 8 was the end.
yeah,
Yeah.
the 3D ones, they became more linear and shorter, it seems to me. And the original one was just so huge. There's so much you could do,
Mm-hmm.
and almost like endless possibilities. Kind of like Ultima too.
I
Ultima
never did play
8.
Ultima. Never played any of the Ultimas. You know, it's going to be weird when we're like 70 and we all have video game references from like the Super Nintendo era and all the kids are like, "You guys are so old."
Well, I noticed that kids are playing a vintage
Really?
video
Well,
games
cuz the ones
again.
now suck.
Yeah, yeah,
They
and
suck.
also I don't think I just don't think great graphics impress anyone anymore, right? It's like
Yeah.
they're so used to that stuff, and the improvements are marginal at this point. They were huge for a time,
Right. I mean, like
and
when we
also.
went from 2D to 3D, that was huge, and then as things got more and more realistic, it was cool.
Mhm,
But to your point, it's like you can make it 100% realistic now, so who cares?
mhm, yeah.
Yeah, that's interesting. If they're playing vintage game. Oh no, it's happening again, Nima. I'm down to 150. Back to 3,000, and I'm just informed about that my internet connection is unstable. Thanks.
By whom? Oh,
I don't know if it
by
was
Zoom.
OBS or Zoom, because it could have come on Zoom and then OBS would have showed it to me. I'm back up to 2,600
It's
in green.
Yeah, the video is still running fine on Restream.
Okay, maybe there was a
Let me check the
burp in the system. In the system.
Seems fine.
Okay, let's redo these. Let me resend out these links. Here are the links for the show. Topic. Don't be a lazy sack of shit. YouTube, Odyssey, Facebook, Twitter, and Twitch. Okay. So when you were in Germany, you had Final Fantasy access,
Yeah, absolutely.
and
We had all the games.
you just played them in English.
Um,
What I mean, were there
not
German
sure.
ports at that time?
German what?
Ports.
What do you mean German ports?
What where they make the game in German and they sell it in German.
Well, yeah, they did make a lot of games in German. I just don't know.
Just don't remember that specific one.
I don't remember if it was English or German, but we definitely had German games. But sometimes it was English. So yeah, Jesus took that title personal. He's the only one here. Well, so you're not lazy. So that's
I don't know. Is sitting around listening to other people fucking yak lazy or not lazy?
no. He's receiving spiritual and intellectual enlightenment. So what we talk about is deep, difficult stuff. So kudos to. Thanks, Jesus, for dropping in.
Yeah, Jesus. Is it Jesus or Jesus? Is that a real name, or are you just calling yourself Jesus because it's funny? Calling himself Jesus. Okay, I'll say Jesus then, because then.
Yeah, because in my jiu-jitsu class, I did beat up Jesus a couple of times. So sorry, Jesus.
He was a carpenter, not a warrior, right?
Yeah.
Okay. I sent you the link or I sent you the picture of that tweet that I want to bring up as the beginning aspect of this. Can you share it instead of me? Just because it's wonky if I do. And then while we're talking about that, I'm doing a local test recording right now. 1, 2, 3, Nima.
Okay.
Say something.
Testing. 1, 2, 3. In the house.
And then while we're talking about that, I'm doing a local test recording.
Testing. 1, 2.
Perfect. Okay. According to all signs, everything should be fucking fine. We restarted everything 3 times and have tested it 27 times. We should be good. Hence. Okay. Jesus, I hope you don't mind a second intro. Or third. I guess it's the third intro. Here we go.
Yeah, thanks, Jesus, for sticking around. We appreciate it.
We'll do it live. Okay. We'll do it live. Fuck it. Do it live. I'll write it and we'll do it live.
Hello, this is Dylan Moore and Nima Majur of Irida TV coming to you today. It is Friday, January 6th, 2023, and we got a fun topic today, which is teaching you to not be a lazy sack of shit. Nima, are we lazy sacks? Are we lazy? Yeah, I'm teaching you too, Nima. I mean, I don't know. Are we lazy sacks of shit sitting here making stuff for other people to listen to so that we never actually get anything done because they're too busy talking and listening to each other? Maybe that's a problem in and of itself. But in general, I tripped across a tweet the other day, which is pretty hard for me because I'm not perusing Twitter, so people share tweets on some other platform. And it caught my interest. Which you don't feedback loops, Nima.
Sorry.
It caught my interest because it was. It's not obvious at first, but it was validating and what's the word I'm looking, glorifying laziness. And it was doing it in a way that I think resonates very well with the millennial population. What's that, Nima?
Well, just say what it's promoting specifically. It's not laziness, it's a specific ideology, right?
Well, here, you want to load it up? We'll read it. Okay. So this is from some chick. It says, unpopular opinion. I don't think your life has to have a purpose or you a grand ambition. I think it's okay to just wander through life finding interesting things until you die. Now, I will admit, I used to think this way. Did you ever think this way, Nima? I don't think you did, based on what you've told me you've done with your life.
Well, no, I wouldn't say I never went that far, but I've certainly veered in that direction off and on, I would say.
And there's an appeal here. Nima, you want to switch us back? There's an appeal here, right? Because you
Did you read it already?
Yeah, I did.
Okay.
You find yourself on the surface of this earth. You just happen to be here at a time when things are relatively safe and you can travel all around the world relatively cheaply, and we can connect to everywhere in the world instantaneously. And for whatever reason, our generation, has really glorified traveling, right? And so you go around and you have
Oh,
these
man.
cool experiences. What are you laughing at?
I hate this glorification of traveling as if it's the end all be all.
Well, and I'm personally going to exemplify it, right? Because I did the backpack through Europe thing for 2.5 fucking years.
Well,
Right?
so just anecdotally, when I was still in the dating market, like 80-90% of the ladies' dating profiles, they always said something along the lines of the things I like. I like traveling and I like food, and that's it. It's like, oh wow, do you have any interesting purpose, any interesting desires or interests in life? Anything deeper, or is it just getting on a plane and chewing on food?
Right.
Is that yeah?
Is that the end all to your existence? And
Right,
then,
right.
I mean, again, I understand the appeal because I lived it, right? Because you say, okay, there's all this cool stuff out there. I really want to go see this cool stuff and experience this cool stuff. And in me in particular, when I traveled, I discovered certain networks, like specific websites. I'll say them. One's helpx.net. This is this website that I used that connects farmers, typically organic hippie farmers, with people who want to help, and they let you stay and they feed you in exchange for a certain amount of work. And I did that for not the full 2 years. I found out it was more interesting to hook up with foreign women. After busting my ass shoveling shit on farms in various corners of Europe. But yeah, I mean, I as I was doing it, so I started this when I was like 23. And I ended it right before I turned 27. And if you're like, well, your math doesn't add up, because I left out a year where I was actually I lived in another state. I moved to Vermont from Washington, and then from there I jumped up to Europe. And I thought I was doing great. I thought I was accomplishing a lot by going out doing all these crazy experiences. And one of the things that one of my personal, I don't know if philosophy is the right term here, but one of my goals was to so not have goals in the future that if I simultaneously threw myself into a difficult situation, which is to say I bought a one-way plane ticket and showed up in the middle of Austria, right? Can I handle it? And how long can I handle it? And I handled it for over 2 years. I just kept going and going and going. And I was helping people. I mean, I've read something since then, like there's this trend now where people will actually beg. Like they'll go traveling and they'll beg for money, and they literally have a sign that says, "I'm traveling, please give me money." I never did that shit. I worked wherever I went, right? But I thought I was being productive and in quotes good and contributing to something because I would help wherever I went. But at one day, and this was close to the end of me doing this, I woke up and I had two occurrences. The first one is that if I don't stop doing this shit, I'm going to still be doing this shit when I'm 50, right? I'm 26 now. I need to either make a commitment that I'm going to stay here and like start a life or go back home. And obviously I ended up deciding to come back home, which thank God I decided that. That was like right before I think that was 2013, right before the whole migrant invasion happened. So I'm glad I made that fucking decision. And the second thing was, it occurred to me that the only reason I was able to do what I was doing was because everybody else that I was staying with made an opposite choice. Right? I'm going to have this cool experience at this farm or this cool experience at that farm. I'm going to go over here. I'm going to go over there and see all these cool things. Well, all those cool things were built by people not doing what I was doing. Right? Those are people, those are things that were built by people who had a goal, who had a vision, and had a drive to go do something. So we look at this girl who's like, well, you don't need a purpose in life. You don't need a big goal. You can just walk around and find interesting things. Well, cool story, but the only reason that you're able to walk around and find interesting things is because they were built by people who had goals and vision. Nima, did you freeze up? Nima?
There
you are.
I can hear you.
There you are. You froze up for a second.
Okay. Yeah, I guess my connection isn't so good. It just told me my connection is unstable. Damn it.
You know what it might be? We're getting hit by a fucking solar flare right now. I wonder if that's the case.
Yeah.
X-class solar flare just popped.
So, and I have a Wi-Fi, but I have a pretty good Wi-Fi router. But let me reorient one of its antennas real quick.
Okay, I'll keep talking about my experiences in Europe. I mean, just to give an example of what I mean by trying to make things as difficult as possible, I started hitchhiking because taking trains, that's for pussies, or finding a ride with a friend or something, that's for a pussy. I'm like, okay, I'm in Vienna. And I've got a thing in Augsburg, Germany that I want to get to. It's typically a 5-hour drive, but I mapped out all the places that I would probably need to stop at. I'm like, okay, so from Vienna to Salzburg, that's a straight shot. From Salzburg to Munich, that's a straight shot. And from Munich to Augsburg, that's a straight shot. So I made signs with, here's my Salzburg sign, here's my Munich sign, and here's my Augsburg sign. I looked up on Google Maps and said, okay, here's the freeway. Here's probably a safe place to stand where people are slow enough to see where I'm standing, and they can pull over once they see me if they decide they want to pick me up, and I'd go fucking hitchhike and see if I could make it in a day, and I did. I made it from Vienna to Salzburg in one day, just hitchhiking. And people warning me of axe murderers and that no one's gonna pick you up or whatever. It was I should say in German, es tut mein Ego gut. It felt really good for my ego to be able to say, "Ha! I did it! I told you I could do it." But again, like going back to what this girl was saying, like, okay, you don't need a purpose; you can just go around experiencing interesting things. That was a very interesting thing for me to experience, and I'd even argue that was, kind of character developing for me. Nima, I'm talking about hitchhiking from Vienna to Augsburg in one day that I did while I was in.
And thanks, Jesus. Jesus says everything's fine on his end. So
okay,
thank you.
If by solar flare you mean crappy internet, everything's fine on my end. Shut the fuck up, Jesus. Yeah. So I mean, I think there was some character development in what I did because I'm putting myself through difficult stuff, but at the same time, I'm not accomplishing anything. Like, if having done all that, if I were to die the next day, there's nothing left to be like, well, here's what Dylan left behind. Right? I mean, okay, for example, at one point I was in Turkey, in Istanbul, and I went to the Hagia Sophia.
Been there, yeah.
Somebody with some drive and vision and goals, probably more than one person, made that motherfucker. In stages, because people kept conquering and it fell apart a couple times and whatever. But this mindset has entirely infected our generation. And again, I don't know about the Zoomers, but at least the millennials, it's entirely infected our generation that we don't try to do anything lasting in the world that we live in. We just try to, see it as we zip by and go, okay, that was fun. And I mean, coming to this realization for myself is what made me flip around and start doing things like I'm doing today and looking back going, yeah, I don't want to do that anymore. But we've got an entire generation of people doing this. Or I should say, maybe half the generation, right? I think half the millennials are like this and half of them are more traditional, get a job, hardworking and such. But half is a lot. So I saw this tweet. I was thinking about it. I was thinking about it in concurrence with my own experience, and it occurred to me. I think this is a form of nihilism, where everything is meaningless. Because I mean, think about it. If you don't have a purpose, you don't have a goal. Okay, maybe nihilism may not acknowledge that something might be interesting, but if you don't have a purpose and you don't have a goal, and therefore there's no meaning to anything, then how's that any different from nihilism?
I mean, no, I was just going to say, how is it not nihilism, what she's proposing there? I would absolutely put that in that category. It suffers from the typical nihilist contradictions, because what she is proposing there is a goal for her life, and what she is proposing there is an ambition for her life. It's just a very lazy one and a very scattery one, but it's nonetheless an ambition that she's proposing. It's okay to just wander through life finding interesting things. Well, what is interesting? So you have some method of determining, or you have some process of determining what's interesting, and that's an ambition, that's a goal, and find interesting things until you die.
Yeah. And I suspect, and again, I'm able to look at myself and my past for this level of introspection, right? I suspect that when you have a goal like this, because as Nima just pointed out, it is a goal. You can claim, oh, I don't have any goals, I just look for interesting things. Well, yes, that in itself is a goal. But I think the desire here is the lack of responsibility. Right? Because if you don't have a goal, if you don't accomplish things, then you can't be responsible for anything.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, in terms of our own accomplishments, Nima, I mean, focus on you for a second. So for those who may not know, Nima was a pretty big player, I guess you kind of still are, in the auction world. Nima developed software for auction systems that are like someone bought his company and they still use his software, and they sell big shit. Like when they sell movie sets or they sell Rockstar paraphernalia or whatever, they're using Nima's auction software.
Yeah, so some of the most expensive memorabilia have been sold through the software. I mean, from one particular auction house that I still work with, but also auction houses around the world still use the software. The company's still employing people. It's still serving a purpose out there. It's still improving itself, even though I'm not with the company anymore. So that's something that, there's people that I hired back in the days that are still with the company, and some of them are abroad, some of them are in the Philippines, where people don't have much, and this has given them a skill set that they can use for the rest of their lives, and this has given them a purpose and a means to feed their families. So
there's something you can point back. Sorry to interrupt. So there's something you can point back and say, I did that. Here's a lasting impact from Nima. Right? And then, I mean, even when you were running the business, I think you said it was you and one other partner, right? That you had a serious responsibility. I mean, even overlooking the employees, you're like, okay, we've started this thing. Okay, here's this rocket. We're trying to get it off the ground and into space. It's off the ground, it's in the air, but we got to keep pushing and pushing and pushing and pushing and pushing in order to get into space, right? You have built this thing, and you're carrying this load of responsibility where if you go, nah, forget it, that thing crashes down, right? That's stressful.
Oh yeah,
it's super stressful, and I'm sure you felt this way a couple times. You're like, why the fuck am I doing this? Is this going to go anywhere? Right? Is this just going to crash on its own?
There's been rough periods, rough times, no doubt.
Yeah,
especially the 2008 recession in the U.S. And it takes a goal, it takes an ambition that is bigger than all the challenges and pitfalls that you encounter along the way.
Yeah. And I mean, if your mindset was never have a goal and never have a vision, or a purpose is the term that she used, then you never have to worry about having the responsibility of such an endeavor. Right? I mean, again, forgetting the other people dependent on you, just the responsibility of you to yourself. Like, here's this thing I'm doing. Do I just walk away from it or not?
Yeah. And
Right.
that was never an option for me because
You had a goal and a purpose.
I had a goal and a purpose. But why did I have a goal and a purpose? Because I grew up with not very necessarily much, and mostly our family was, I wouldn't say they were necessarily struggling, but we definitely had to ration and deal with shortages of money here and there. And I went to a school in an area with lots of rich kids. So I think that was the inception of that vanity that gave me the drive to achieve something bigger.
Well, and then let's explore that. So you're not, well, I mean, it doesn't sound like you were like dirt floor poor, but you're not rich, right? And like you mentioned, there's some struggle there, and you go in and see the rich kids. Why did that inspire you to do better as opposed to just pissing you off and separating you from wanting to do that? Because that happens to a lot of people. Good question.
I would say because yeah, good question. Because I just saw especially the era we grew up in, there was opportunities everywhere. So I could not possibly accept that, oh, this just ticks me off and I'm not going to do anything, because I guess I saw the people who thought that way and they didn't inspire me, they didn't impress me, they didn't seem to be happy with what they were doing. So that was probably why I had the drive to.
I got to compare this to my drive that I had when I made the decision to do the vagabond thing. So when I was in college, I majored in chemistry, and my junior year, I got a job as a laboratory technician at one of the local oil refineries. I went to school in Bellingham, Washington, and there's two refineries up north from there. There's a ConocoPhillips and a BP. I got to work at the ConocoPhillips. And the idea, technically, I was an intern, but I did the same thing as everybody else did. They paid me, but not as much as it would pay a non-contractor, right? That ConocoPhillips gives all these benefits to all their employees, but only half the people working there are employees. The other half are contractors. That's how they get around that. But so I'm a contractor. I got paid pretty well for a college student. I'll admit that. And I had a guaranteed job upon graduation. I mean, I literally could still be working there today, right? Now, I'm sitting there in this laboratory for many, many, many hours, and a lot of times there wasn't that much to do, particularly on the weekends. And I thought about this, and I'm like, okay, the head chemists here, they make about $60,000 a year. This was 2007. They make about $60,000 a year. And I'm like, well, what can I get with $60,000 a year? First of all, I'm going to have to move here. And I don't necessarily want to live here. I'm going to have to buy a meh house. I'm going to have to buy a meh car. So I'm going to live in a place I don't want to live in a house I don't want to live, have a car that I don't like to get to a job that I don't want to get to. And I said, fuck this. I'd rather be dirt fucking poor than deal with this shit. So I quit screaming before I graduated, and after I graduated, I did the martial art apprentice thing for my Aikido instructor at a Shinto shrine. So if you ever see those kung fu movies where they're like, carrying buckets of water up a hill, that was me. I was doing that shit. And then after I did that for 6 months, and then after that, I'm like, how do I get myself even lower? And I'm like, I'm just gonna leave. And I bought a one-way plane ticket to Vermont without telling anybody. I just bought it. And then I told everybody and I left. And I was there for a year, and I did it again. I said, okay, I'm gonna buy a one-way plane ticket to Europe before I tell anybody. And I did it, and I left. And for me, the idea of doing something in order to accumulate enough money to say I'm rich or whatever. It didn't even occur to me. Didn't even fucking cross my mind. And I felt at odds with people who were like that because I couldn't even conceptualize what it'd be like there. I could only visualize, okay, here's middle class per the description I just gave of like, okay, I hate this job and I hate where I live and I just drive in between the two. Versus, hey, I don't have much, but I could just go around doing whatever I want because I have some level of freedom. I find it very fascinating that we we had two completely different reactions to the frustration looking at the situation we grew up in.
Mm-hmm.
I have no idea what would cause the difference.
Yeah, I mean, to me, the vagabond proposition would not have worked because I would have considered that to be a situation where you're constantly in want and you are dependent on others.
Mm-hmm.
You're dependent on other people's money, on jobs from other people, even if it's just odd jobs you're doing here and there. You never have that feeling of comfort and achievement and a situation where you just I can relax a little bit. I can do what I feel like doing because you can't do that unless you have the means to do that.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe that's why.
Well, I think maybe I figured out the answer. So, getting a little more personal here. My parents were divorced when I was 4. And my mom was, I would say still is, a fucking psycho. And she was such a psycho that when I was in my 20s, I stumbled across an article discussing narcissistic parents. And the description of the narcissistic parent fit my mother so perfectly, I thought this person was like spying on me my whole life and wrote a fucking article about me. It was like that specific. Or I should say, it was that accurate of a description of what I experienced. And to your point of, you can never relax, you can never have any sort of sense of being settled. Well, I never had that in my house. Everything was just in constant turmoil. My dad's ripped away from me, and my favorite thing my mom liked to, I don't know if it was her favorite, but it was on the list, is take things away from me that I liked or that I enjoyed. So for me, being in a situation where I'm in constant struggle and I'm basically standing on shifting sand all the time was just what I grew up with. So I guess it's I think we're getting deeper into the situation here, because if I'm just chasing the situation of my childhood, of my household, of when I grew up, and if you want to describe yours, I'm wondering if you can draw a similar corollary. What is the similar situation that so many millennials grew up with that we want to do this, that we have this nihilistic viewpoint?
Well, I think to some extent it might be that millennials grew up, especially American millennials grew up in a time of abundance, and a lot of things were just assumed and taken for granted.
Mm-hmm.
So on the material realm, maybe there wasn't much to accomplish or to achieve, or they didn't really consider material achievements accomplishments in any way, or necessary accomplishments, because they thought they already had it. They had a family, they had a house, they had this and that. A lot of that sort of started crumbling, I think, with the financial crisis
Right.
in 2007, 2008. But until that point, the American middle-class family was pretty well off and pretty much lived in relative abundance relative to the rest of the world.
Well-
Probably still do, but it's sort of, there's definitely been a lot more uncertainty introduced into the household with that crisis.
Well, to the point of the crash, I guess it's also interesting to point out that the crash happened right as we were graduating college. Right, I graduated college in 2009. Right now, by my actions, I left the job that I had guaranteed and went off and did my thing, so I didn't really feel it. But there was this real big societal fuck you that hit us, where we were told, okay, do all these things, and when you graduate, you're going to get rewarded with by society with stuff that society provides, and then as soon as we did all the stuff that we were told to, we fell off a cliff.
Yeah.
So I also wonder if that may have had something to do with it, where we're like, okay, well, society has nothing to provide, so I guess I'll just go find fucking something interesting to do, to this girl's point.
Yeah.
And I think it's worth describing my turnaround, right? So I obviously am not doing that anymore, and I had a come to Jesus moment. You're listening to that, Jesus? I had a come to you moment. We got a listener in there named Jesus making comments at us. And he this is going to sound cliche at this point. I ran into the book Rich Dad, Poor Dad. Have you heard of it or read it, Nima?
I have it actually, but I have not read it, but I have it somewhere.
Well, and then when he talks about his definition of rich people, middle class, and poor people, which is just real quick. Rich people make money and they buy income-producing assets. Middle-class people make money and they buy income-draining liabilities like houses and cars. And poor people make money and they just burn it on immediate consumption. They go to a party or buy alcohol or whatever, right? And I discovered this near the end of my vagabonding time, and when I read that, I realized that when I flipped off the oil refinery and ran away to my vagabonding thing, I understood the middle class and the poor. And I was making a decision between what I thought were my only two options. Like I said, it didn't even occur to me to think of how what a rich person would look like. And then just to have somebody say, hey, here's a description of the three different types of people, I was like, oh, well, now that I know that it exists, I could start to move in that direction, right? And so, I mean, for me, then I immediately ran into the conundrum of, okay, I'm going to come back. I came back to the United States. I literally had $5 in my pocket when I got here. I mean, I think I found some money stashed away in my mom's house or something after I got back. But when I got here on the airport, my bank account was empty, and I had $40 when I left. I'd spent $35 on airplane food, and I had $5 left in my pocket. And I was like, I'm going to go do real estate. Not being a fucking agent licensed or whatever. I'm like, I'm going to go do real estate deals. And I was like, but how do I avoid getting a job at the fucking oil refinery again? Because that's all my skill set. I mean, if I'm going to look at my resume, that's the only thing I got going for me on my resume is I could work at an oil refinery again as a lab tech. And I'm like, well, now I got a goal. I'm going to do this big thing. Now, it took me a while because my mindset was just not set that way, but I did end up eventually doing a couple real estate deals. The first one, I did two. Both were quite painful. I didn't lose any money, but I did not make the amount of money that I was hoping I would have, or that I should have based on hindsight, where it's like, oh, if we'd done all these things, we could have made so much more money. Yeah, great. But I did learn some valuable lessons, and then I've jumped from there to the point where I've done my first acquisition on a business. I now have 40 employees, roughly speaking, depending on, it's a lot of turnover in one of the places, but I have roughly 40 employees, and so back, similar to what Nima was saying, I've got people dependent on me. I've got responsibilities. I mean, I can get a phone call that's like, oh my God, this thing's happening. I mean, if it happened right now, I got to drop everything and go run and take care of it because I've got some fucking responsibility. And I think it's worth coming back to that. And, now we're getting close to the tantalizing subject of nihilism, which is, I think, fundamentally, an outlook like this, which is nihilistic, is the fear of being responsible. The less stuff that you have control over, the less of your responsibility, or I could say it this way, the less, or the more power you have, the more responsibility you have, and vice versa. And so an outlook like this, have no goal, have no purpose, is to say have no power, which follows have no responsibility. I think fundamentally this is a fear of responsibility. No comment, Nima?
Well, yeah, it is. It's fundamentally fear of responsibility. You could also say it's fundamentally denial of truth, but I guess what you're saying is what is the sentiment that triggers that kind of belief? And yeah, it is.
Well, I think the fear of responsibility and the denial of truth aren't that too separated from each other. Because if responsibility is kind of weird in the sense of, okay, right now, let's say there's a comet coming toward Earth. I'm not responsible for fixing it because I have no power to do so. Right? Now, if I had the power to do so, let's say I got a rocket here that I can crank up and shoot the asteroid with. Well, then I've got the responsibility for dealing with that. That's the black and white responsibility. Here's the gray responsibility, which is right now I'm looking at what I'm sitting here going, okay, what could I do right now? If I make a decision that says, okay, do something that does not make myself more powerful, in the future I will not have any responsibility to deal with big things, right? My metaphorical asteroid coming toward the Earth. But if I say, okay, right now, I understand that I have the capacity to do things that make me more powerful. Earning money is an example of that, right? I have the capacity to do things to make myself more powerful. And so I'm going to start choosing to move in that direction. I know at some point, as I get more and more powerful, I am going to find myself in these metaphorical asteroid situations where I'm responsible for making a decision of what to do about this big thing that's coming. So if I can have the mindset to avoid that power, I know I can avoid any future responsibility. However, that choice in and of itself was something that you were responsible for. You had a responsibility to you were responsible for the choice of, do I go less power or do I go more power? And nihilism, or this infection that this girl is describing that I had at one point, is a way to choose going, okay, don't get any more power, because I think fundamentally they have a fear of responsibility, and they know if they don't accumulate the power, they'll never be responsible for dealing with a big decision.
I think that's a particular version of nihilism, but there's also a lot of nihilists who absolutely want to attain power, and they apply nihilist morality to what they're doing, right? Because if everything's a free-for-all, then my will to power, I think Nietzsche called it that too, is completely justified because there's no justification. So really, I can do whatever I want. And Nietzsche defines nihilism as that there is no truth, that there is no absolute state of affairs, no thing in itself. This alone is nihilism, and of the most extreme kind. That's from Will to Power, Volume 1, in the complete works of Friedrich Nietzsche. Yeah, I'm just reading from Father Seraphim Rose's book, Nihilism, which is from the 1960s. I think it's taken from some big, greater work that he was working on, extracted from that. But that greater work he never published, I think. So, yeah, that's where this is from.
So I think the recommendation should be bubbling up for both B and Nima here is you got to learn to have some sense of purpose, and you've got to learn to have a goal. And if you've accepted this outlook that this girl is proselytizing, it's going to be really painful and really difficult for you to formulate a goal or formulate a purpose, because for whatever reason, just like me, I had been trained not to do that. I'd seriously been trained not to do that.
It's also clearly linked with atheism because you also have you have to have faith in life, and whether or not you like it or whether or not you think so, you will always have faith in something,
Right.
right? The question is, what do you have faith in? You know, what do you ultimately choose to have faith in? Whether it's logic in itself, or whether it's the omnipotent, omniscient creator of the universe, whether it's the scientific method, whether it's the proclamations of Dr. Fauci. You choose to have faith in something at the end of the day.
You were so pissed off at Dr. Fauci. I mean, I am too, but I don't think it's the same level. I don't think it's the same level as you.
Yeah, Uncle Tony.
To that point, I mean, let's spur off into religion world here. Is that, Dr. E. Michael Jones, when we had him on, was discussing this. Is that something interesting happened from Isaac Newton on? Because Isaac Newton created a description of the universe where everything moved on its own, as opposed to a prior accepted description of the universe where everything had a meaning and a purpose put there by God. Physics is happening because God has given things a certain purpose. Whereas Newton created this world of gravity and inertia, where you have these two opposing forces that work together, so stuff is kind of on this automatic clock. And I'm not trying to talk about physics here. I'm trying to talk about philosophy, which is if you remove it, you could take Newton's universe. I'm not saying Newton did this, but subsequent people definitely did this. If you take Newton's universe, you don't need God to describe it. Well, I think you need God to describe the beginning of it. But you don't necessarily need God to describe the actual, okay, here's this planet moving through space. That's just what it does because of gravity and inertia, right? So we've got this thing where there's no meaning needed anymore behind things. Stuff just moves based on these two competing forces. And you have outlooks that cascade down from that. Right? Well, if there's no meaning to the universe, well, what does that mean for me within this universe if I'm just a bunch of atoms bouncing around that get replaced every 7 years, right? If you start to accept that line of thinking, I mean, unless you're actively contradicting yourself, you can't have a goal and you can't have a purpose because there is no goal and there is no purpose, right? So to your point in terms of having faith in something, if you want to have a goal or you want to have a purpose somewhere, I mean, obviously you got to have faith in yourself to achieve that thing, but you have to have faith simply in the fact that there's meaning behind the goal, there's meaning behind the purpose, it's good and not bad, right? That I'm doing this thing because it's gooder than it would have been, and I'll be not doing the thing which would have been badder. So. The question just keeps coming back to me. Where did we pick up the spiritual sickness? And I think you were broaching the subject of we had the material pretty much down before the crash of 2008, or I would say even more specifically before the war, before 9/11, because 9/11 shook us up pretty psychologically. But before that, the material world was pretty okay. The Soviet Union had fallen. There was no specter of communism, and in the West, we're kind of like,
yay,
all this stuff's taken care of. So now what the fuck do we do?
We're done.
Yeah. Not that I want to give too much credence to Jordan Peterson, but it does remind me of something that he said, which is that if we created a perfect utopia, the first thing that we would do is break it.
Yes.
Which I'll agree. I agree with him on that.
I think that has become absolutely certain for me with the KUFIT 18+1 scam.
Yeah.
Because that has shown me our ability to just shit all over everything that matters and everything we've done and tear it all down.
Oh, there's all these cultural tenets that we have. Yeah, fuck all those.
Yeah, with all just shut down the entire economy. Are you people insane?
Well, but shut down all the freedom too. That's not enough. We got to shut down freedom and the economy, Nima.
The freedom, economy. So permanent house arrest, indefinite house arrest, and shutting down the economy in response to a coup sounds like a plan to people. I mean, when I saw that was even remotely possible, and not just remotely possible, it was here.
It was glorifyingly successful.
I could not believe it. It just changed my outlook on the prospect for any long-lasting material success and any long-lasting prosperity for the whole of the world, or for even just for portions of the world. It's just shown me how capable we are of just tearing that all down overnight. Like it was an overnight decision. Maybe a day or two is what it took to tear it all down.
That is wild to think about.
It's incredible. It's incredible.
We got sold 2 weeks to slow the spread. And it lasted for over 2 years with trailings of bullshit still left behind, right? And all the legal or illegal parameters that were set forth, not all of them, but a lot of them, still here. Similar to how 9/11 changed everything, even though Spectre is no longer here.
That wasn't enough. Even shut everything down, take all our freedoms, lock us into our homes for indefinite amounts of time. No, we're also going to inject everyone. We're going to treat this coup with an experimental gene therapy that gives you heart attacks and blood clots and permanent heart disease.
Remember, we're on YouTube. We love the COVID shot. Pfizer is God. For the YouTube censors. Say COVID. You didn't, but I just want to be clear that whatever you think Nima might be saying, it has nothing to do with contradicting the fact that we love COVID and Pfizer is God. No, wait, excuse me. We love the COVID shot. There we go. The COVID vaccine. It's amazing. No, that is an interesting.
Incredible.
That is an interesting aspect. So I mean, we get to a situation. Why are we so eager? Yeah, I mean, sorry, I've said this interesting 3 times now. We were so eager to break the system apart. I mean, not me, not you, but in general, it's like, okay, there's a coup, so just destroy everything. Fuck it.
And I mean, in particular, this coming from people who for years tell us, oh no, don't use these words. They might trigger someone somewhere. Oh no, don't say that. Oh no, don't write this or that because it's harmful to one person. Oh no, don't have a Christmas tree on this tree because it offends someone. All these delicate, precious little sensitivities, but suddenly it's okay to tear everything down, to lock everyone up in their homes indefinitely, put them under permanent house arrest, for no fucking reason at all. Well, that was suddenly okay, but it came from the same people who are so hyper precious and hypersensitive about all these little inconsequential things, and still are for them.
Well, I mean, we've got the MPC theory that describes it, but I think what you brought up is something more interesting. The MPC theory, of course, being that there's the group of zombies that just repeat whatever they're programmed to repeat, and it doesn't matter if they contradicted them. They're contradicting themselves 5 minutes ago.
We have a comment. Nima, this nation was not torn down overnight. It started with Reagan and every president after tearing it down little by little.
Well, I think we're talking about 2 different things here. Jesus. I think what Nima's trying to point out here is that we reached this critical moment. Yeah, it's obviously the Illuminati overlords have been working overtime since, I would go back further than Reagan, but we'll take Reagan for example. but just the sense of, okay, now we're going to flip the switch.
Yeah. You
We're
see,
going to
so
flip
I'm not.
the coof switch. And
I was.
the breakneck speed that we all participate in. Sorry, Nima.
I was trying to point out what made it obvious to me. The moment
Yeah.
when I realized, yeah, if we attain utopia, we're going to tear it down. What you said earlier. It obviously, yeah, there was a lot of tearing down before and all that, but it never was more apparent to me than that moment.
Well, everything happened in the background, right? All the tearing down, was in these bureaucratic committees and laws that got passed with language buried deep
But
everywhere.
it's still required for the public to be receptive to that.
Right.
And
Yes.
maybe
Yeah.
I did not. Maybe I was too optimistic about public opinion and the public's constitution, basically the constitution of mind.
Yeah. So again, to your point is, okay, on one hand, we can kind of explain this with the NPC theory, like, okay, here's this group of people that have been completely programmed, where the new programming can just be shoved in whenever an update is necessary. But is there something even more fundamental, which is to say, okay, the people in the society are looking around the society, and they've had enough of it, and they want the reason, they want somebody to flip that switch.
Well, yeah, I think in particular because people started getting bribed to not work to the tune of amounts that were unimaginable before that happened. So there was a lot of people whose lives were so purposeless and so crappy, I guess, that this was a plan. This sounded like a plan to them, to sit at home in their coom pods and get money sent to them and order food online for the rest of their lives.
Well, it's completely in line with the tweet we read at the beginning.
Exactly.
I'm just going to sit at home and experience some interesting things.
Yeah, it takes us back to nihilism. And yes, in the beginning of when the lockdowns first began, there was this air of excitement, undeniably. I mean, I've had people telling me even this. It's like, oh wow, something huge is happening. It had an air of excitement for a lot of people.
I had that air myself. Sounds like you didn't have it, but I
I
had
have to
it.
admit,
Yeah.
well, I know, I certainly did. I mean, I was not happy, but I certainly had a sensation of, whoa, this is interesting. You know, what's going on? You know, this is different. Yes, it was different. So were gulags, and so were concentration camps. You know.
And so are the Mongols. This is very different. We're all dead. Yes. No, so I mean, again,
Should we talk a little bit about?
Yeah, go for it. I was
Nihilism,
going to bring it back to laziness, but go for nihilism first.
So, Seraphim Rose, in his book Nihilism, he distinguishes between four general categories of negative metaphysics, which is basically suggesting that there's no truth, or that truth is relative, which is basically nihilism. I don't know if this is all-encompassing, or if there's maybe some other strands of nihilism, but he distinguishes between these four driving forces that came with the Age of Enlightenment that constitute the reasons, the core reasons why we're where we're at today with nihilism. So he distinguishes roughly between realism and agnosticism. And each of those, again, he divides into naive and critical.
Wait,
so we have naive.
So I'm sorry, real quick. I just want to make sure I'm with you. Realism and Gnosticism is a division of nihilism, saying, okay, these are two different camps under the nihilistic umbrella. Okay.
To simplify, we can put it. Like I said, I don't know. Maybe there's more nihilistic camps, but so the denial of truth, he opposes four different movements that basically naive realism, critical realism, naive agnosticism, critical agnosticism. Naive realism also called naturalism, does not precisely deny absolute truth, but rather makes absolute claims of its own that cannot be defended. Rejecting any ideal or spiritual absolute, it claims the absolute truth of materialism and determinism. This philosophy is still current in some circles. It is official Marxist doctrine, and is expounded by some unsophisticated scientific thinkers in the West. But the main current of contemporary thought has left it behind, and it seems today the quaint relic of a simpler but bygone day, the Victorian day, when many transferred to science the allegiance and emotions they had once devoted to religion.
So this was the critical realism?
This was the naive realism.
Naive realism. Okay, I mean, that sounds like the Isaac Newton universe story that I just described from...
Could be. I mean, it's basically what Marxist dialectic is based on. It is the impossible formulation of a scientific metaphysics. Impossible because science is, by its nature, knowledge of the particular, and metaphysics is knowledge of what underlies the particular and is presupposed by it. It is a suicidal philosophy in that the materialism and determinism it posits render all philosophy invalid. Since it must insist that philosophy, like everything else, is determined, its advances can only claim that their philosophy, since it exists, is inevitable. You see, this is why Marxism...
I get it, yeah. Okay, that's funny.
Marxism is inevitable, right? Because of the dialectic, the Hegelian dialectic. But not all that their philosophy, since it exists, is inevitable, but not at all that it is true. This philosophy, in fact, if consistent, would do away with the category of truth altogether. But its adherents, innocent of thought that is either consistent or profound, seem unaware of this fatal contradiction. The contradiction may be seen on a less abstract level in the altruistic and idealistic practice of, for example, the Russian nihilists of the last century. So, that's the first one. Do you have any comments on that?
I was given I do have another one. So when it comes to determinism, I could see how determinism does immediately create a situation of nihilism, because if the universe is deterministic, which includes you and me, and there's no free will agents, that means responsibility doesn't exist, because nobody's making any choices. And if responsibility doesn't exist, well, then there's no such thing as any moral code, because nobody chose to do any. I mean, the whole idea of justice and moral code is, what did you choose to do, right?
Well, also, there's no truth, because truth implies that you picked the right or the wrong choice, and if everything's determined, there's no such thing as truth. This is why arguing with a determinist is so funny, because a determinist tries to convince you of the truth that his ideology is true, while at the same time saying everything is predetermined and there's no such thing as free will or choice.
Right. You want me to change my free will with an argument saying there's no such thing as free will. Got it.
Right. By the way, we have a comment. That's what the capitalist oligarchs want. They want me lazy, push a UBI, turn me into a non-productive consumer. Congrats, capitalism. You've beat humanity into a conformist consumption unit.
I would actually disagree with that. They want you dead.
Yeah, they want you... Well, they want some sort of population. They want to feed on the energy of some degree of population. They don't want as many people as there are right now. They want it more manageable. But I do think they want an underclass to rule over. Because otherwise, why? If they eliminate everyone, they were the only ones.
There's no one to be God over, right?
That would be terrible for them, because they want to rule over people. So they need some people to rule over, I think. So yeah, push a UBI, turn me into a non-productive consumer, hook me up to the Matrix battery, put me in the Coom pod, play porn.
And that's all great if you're just looking for interesting things to bump into throughout your life.
Right. But put me on a tube. I mean, how is this not the ultimate existence, the ultimate state of happiness for the nihilist to just be hooked up with like some electrodes to the brain that stimulate your orgasm centers every minute.
And then that's existence. Yeah.
And you sit there and you just twitch all day. That's the end all be all of all happiness, I guess.
Yeah.
You know, so that maybe there's something wrong with that kind of thinking. You know, it just appears on its face ridiculous, and maybe there's just something fundamentally wrong. Critical realism or positivism is the straightforward denial of metaphysical truth. Okay, so while naive realism suggests there is a truth, it's not spiritual or ideal, but it's material and it's deterministic, and I have figured it out. Like Hegel, for example, you know, and the Hegelians say we have figured out the ultimate movement of all the material forces in the world and the dialectic and blah blah. Critical realism, on the other hand, is straightforward denial of metaphysical truth, proceeding from the same scientific predispositions as the more naive naturalism. It professes greater modesty in abandoning the absolute altogether and restricting itself to empirical relative truth. We have already noted the contradiction in this position. The denial of absolute truth is itself an absolute truth. Again, as with naturalism, naturalism was the previous one. The naive realism is also called naturalism. As with naturalism, the very positing of the first principle of positivism is its own refutation. This is like something I encounter when I talk to amateurs, philosophical amateurs, all the time. Like the denial of the absolute certainty about the denial of absolute truth. It's instinctive. With this brain virus, it comes out as a knee-jerk reaction, as a knee-jerk response. When you start talking about absolute truth, like my dad, for example. I had a conversation with my dad the other day. We talk about how do we determine absolute truth. I mean, I wasn't even done saying the sentence, and his response is, "There's no absolute truth." So,
are you absolutely sure about that? Is that
exactly
absolutely
what I
the truth?
responded.
That there's no absolute truth? Yeah.
Like this. This is what I told him. Is that absolutely true what you just said? Is that true what you just said?
And what was his response to that?
He said, yes, it is. That's the one thing that's true. He's identified the one truth. Agnosticism, like realism. So now we come to agnosticism. Okay,
so and then just so I'm categorizing this in my mind. We had the naive realism, which is also called naturalism, which is kind of the Marxist world. Then we had critical realism, which you said was positivism.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. And now we're moving back to the other side, or not back, but moving over to the other side of agnosticism, where we got to split it up into naive and critical.
Yeah.
Okay.
And the critical realism denies denies that there's any metaphysical truth, denies that there's any reality. Contends itself with relative truth, ideas in the head.
I do have one comment here, and this is likely going to apply to all four of these, but from what we've heard so far, you're so easy to control if you believe this.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, if you take someone who believes this stuff next to someone who believes in absolute truth, and they say, well, this guy has some really easy buttons to push. Oh, you're angry about that? Oh, you want to stop that? Well, there's no such thing as absolute truth, and so don't worry about it. Oh, okay. Well, I guess.
Bingo. This is the world of today. This is the corporate media. How do we push buttons and prod people into this or that direction to benefit someone's agenda, to make someone insanely wealthy? I mean, that's exactly what it is. Agnosticism, like realism, may be distinguished as naive and critical. Naive or doctrinaire agnosticism posits the absolute unknowability of any absolute truth, While its claim seems more modest, even than that of positivism, it still quite clearly claims too much. If it actually knows that the absolute is unknowable, then this knowledge is itself absolute. Such agnosticism is in fact but a variety of positivism, attempting with no greater success to cover up its contradictions. So once again, there is no absolute truth, and
Well, no, isn't it more okay? If there is an absolute truth, we cannot access it. That's the argument, right? Which,
you're right,
in and of itself, you're still proclaiming an absolute truth. How did you access that absolute truth that you said we can't access?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Only in critical or pure agnosticism, so this is the final one now, in pure agnosticism do we find at last what seems to be a successful renunciation of the absolute. Unfortunately, such renunciation entails the renunciation of everything else and ends, if it is consistent, in total solipsism. Such agnosticism is the simple statement of fact. We do not know whether there exists an absolute truth or what its nature could be if it did exist. Let us then, this is the corollary, content ourselves with the empirical relative truth we can know.
Is there a philosophical term used for this?
It's called pure agnosticism.
No, but I mean like the realistic naive was naturalism, right? Is there something similar to this one?
Yeah. So here the critical is called pure agnosticism.
Okay.
So critical agnosticism is also known as pure agnosticism.
And the naive agnosticism, does that have another name?
It's called doctrinaire agnosticism.
Okay. So
But what is truth? What is knowledge? If there is no absolute standard by which these are to be measured, they cannot even be defined. The agnostic, if he acknowledges this criticism, does not allow it to disturb him. His position is one of pragmatism, experimentalism, instrumentalism. There is no truth, but man can survive, can get along in the world without it. Such a position has been defended in high places, and in very low places as well, in our anti-intellectualist century. But the least one can say of it is that it is intellectually irresponsible. It is the definitive abandonment of truth, or rather the surrender of the truth to power, whether that power be nation, race, class, comfort, or whatever other cause is able to absorb the energies men once devoted to the truth. The pragmatist and the agnostic may be quite sincere and well-meaning, but they only deceive themselves and others if they continue to use the word truth to describe what they're seeking. Their existence, in fact, is testimony to the fact that the search for truth, which has so long animated European man, has come to an end. For centuries and more of modern thought have been, from one point of view, an experiment in the possibilities of knowledge open to man, assuming that there is no revealed truth. The conclusion, which Hume already saw and from which he fled into the comfort of common sense and conventional life, in which the multitudes sense today without possessing any such secure refuge, the conclusion of this experiment is an absolute negation. If there is no revealed truth, there is no truth at all. The search for truth outside of revelation has come to a dead end. The scientist admits this by restricting himself to the narrowest of specialties, content if he sees a certain coherence in a limited aggregate of facts. I mean, does this not sound contemporary and familiar?
Yes.
Restricting himself to the narrowest of specialties. I mean, we have people that are wheeled out on TV as scientific geniuses who have the most rudimentary and stupidest conceptions of metaphysics and of epistemology, of knowledge.
And of science itself. I mean,
science itself.
Yeah. Part of the point of science is you question it.
Right. And so the people, the science has settled on this. Bullshit. The science never settles. The whole point of science is that it doesn't settle. I talked to a friend a while ago, a former college buddy of mine. I mean, from back in Germany, and he told me he thought he was saying something very profound when he told me regarding the COVID 18+1 lockdowns and the love jabs, the jabby jabs that cure everyone. Well, Nima, everyone's entitled to their opinion, but you're not entitled to your own facts. And he said that in order to defend the actions of those in power who claim to have absolutely access to their facts and who absolutely have determined that they have, sorry, what was the word? Claim to
reality, claim to the facts.
Claim to fact. So you can have your opinion. You have the right to an opinion, not the right to facts. Except the whole discussion we're having is about people in power acting like they're speaking facts into existence.
Right. Well, and I mean,
like,
I would even argue, like, sorry to interrupt, I'm just imagining how I'd respond. It's like, who's talking about being entitled to facts? Like, that doesn't fucking make sense. What do you mean? Like, okay, my phone is black. Am I entitled to that fact? Like, that doesn't even grammatically you could form that sentence, but there's no logical fucking way to explain anything about that. Sorry.
The bigger problem I have with that statement is the thinking. Again, I think it's a brain virus or brain defect. The idea that humans can pronounce absolute facts into existence.
As if these humans can and you can't.
Right, and because this is like this quest for brute facts. This is also Sam Harris has talked about this on his podcast. They have no recognition of the numbers of layers in between the supposed fact and you speaking about that supposed fact. Mm-hmm. And it's like, I mean, it's when it comes to the COVID 18+1 story, it's so obviously the case, right? When you see a number on a TV screen and you think that is a fact, that you have some serious issues metaphysically, philosophically. I mean, you are so low IQ in the philosophy realm. You're operating on the lowest level of philosophy, and that's what that's where most scientists who are wheeled out as geniuses who we need to listen to, that's where they're operating at.
I think most scientists operate that in general. Just in general. Yeah. That's where they're at.
So that's why I mentioned instrumentalism, right? So
and to that point,
absolutely no appreciation of the fact that there are instruments that you're using, that there's measurements that you're using, that there are people who have built these instruments, like, for example, the COVID 18+1 PCR test, which PCR tests don't work, by the way, don't work for the purpose of infection detection.
According to the guy who invented them.
Kerry Mullis, who invented, I was just going to flash his book, but I don't have it. No appreciation for the fact that the people pronouncing these ideas themselves have goals and interests and need funding for grants. No appreciation for all these layers and layers and layers and layers and layers in between the supposed brute fact and the person speaking about that supposed fact. All these things don't exist. These layers don't exist in the minds of the scientists.
Well, call me broken record, but I think it's not a question of, what's the metaphysics and the epistemology of figuring out a fact. I think it's a way of shirking responsibility. Because, for example, Nima, if what you said was true to this person about the glorious COVID vaccine from God Pfizer that works 100% of the time and is 100% effective, and we worship on a daily basis. YouTube, believe me 100% when I say that. If your argument is true, and he has to turn around and question that, now suddenly he's responsible for acting on the fact that that's true, or at least what he's hearing isn't true, which means he's got to do some uncomfortable interactions with the people around him in the rest of his life, and he doesn't want that responsibility. Therefore, the philosophical poison that we're discussing is attractive. Because for most people, hopefully not you and me, for most people, that line of bullshit works. That line of bullshit works.
Right.
So if they accept it and they repeat it, they get to get away scot-free with bullshit, and they're not responsible for their fucking actions.
Right, 'cause people think they say something profound when they say, well, I just go by the facts. I don't know what you're doing, but I'm going with the facts. I just go with the science. I don't know what you're doing. I go with the science. And because I said the word, Look, I said a word, science. I am smart. I'm scientific. I'm intelligent. You're really operating on the lowest level you could possibly be operating at when it comes to epistemology, philosophy, and with that science.
And the history of science, like...
and the philosophy of science. Philosophy of science.
I mean, just to elaborate on that a little bit. Of course, you and I know, Nima. What does the word science mean?
Knowledge.
Oh, okay. I bet you just taught some people something right there who are so proud of the word science. But science doesn't show anything. Science doesn't prove anything. Science, like we said, is never settled. What's important about that word is when we make it an adjective and apply it to another noun called method. The scientific method, right? We arrived at this knowledge, we arrived at this science by the application of a certain method. The emphasis is less on the conclusion that you arrived at, the emphasis on how did you get there. The emphasis on how did you get there. And if that's true, then the whole, I follow the science completely breaks down, because then they have to focus on, how did we get to this science? Right? What was the methodology that was followed to get here? And as we said, the whole idea behind the scientific method is to say, there's a good chance we never fully get it right. We have to continuously come back in here and look at the assumptions that we had, look at the mistakes that we may have made, look at the error we may have calculated into this. What are our biases? All the stuff that we pumped into it. The scientific method is supposed to help us navigate through that, right? And if you just say, science, that's the focus. Well, you're missing the most important part, which is the verb, not the noun.
Yeah, you're not doing science actually. Yeah. You're doing faith. I mean, and you're doing extreme faith. You're eliminating all kinds of thought and questioning and skepticism and thinking that would be necessary to understand the shortcomings of this or that experiment, of this or that scientific organization, of this or that mega corporation funding this or that scientist, of this or that biased individual, of this or that flawed instrument. I mean, these things don't exist in the world of these brain-dead retards, apparently.
And they don't want it to. That's what I'm saying. They don't want it to, because they don't want the responsibility of knowing this. Because here's the interesting thing about knowledge that I have come to realize. When you know something, you suddenly become responsible for it. Right? Let me give an example. Let's say that fire behind Nima right now isn't a fire on his TV and it's a real fire. And Nima's house is on fire. And he's asleep and he doesn't know. And I see it because I'm watching him through his computer while he sleeps. And now that I know that his house is on fire, and I know he doesn't know because I know he's sleeping, and I have the chance to call him and wake him up to get him out of that house, I'm now responsible for Nima's life. And I can act on that knowledge. So knowledge necessitates action. People don't get this. Knowledge necessitates action, and it's so self-evident that people will die before they accept knowledge the people will die before they accept knowledge that will force them to act in an uncomfortable manner. That's why your friend hit you with this bullshit response, and instead of dealing with, okay, here are the facts. We got to take into account the 4 million layers in between the thing that happened and us talking about it, right? But to the best of our ability, how do we put facts on the table and organize them in a sufficient way? He didn't do that. He just said, "There's no such thing as facts."
Yeah,
right.
There is facts, and the things I believe
it comes
in.
to the same thing. When you talk, there's no such thing as facts. Is what he was saying.
Right, but when I talk, but what I reference, those are all facts because I said so.
Right.
And we were talking about the censorship of dissenting viewpoints on social media, and he was trying to give me an excuse as to why certain views could be censored. And so he was trying to tell me, well, the people who are getting censors, they're just trying to lay claim on their own facts, and you don't get to do that, right? Only the powerful get to do that, apparently. But the main crux is, am I allowed to disagree with you on what you consider a fact or not?
Yeah.
No. Well, yeah, but his thinking would be, no, I'm not allowed to.
Right.
Right.
And his argumentation is essentially, Nima, you do not have access to facts.
Right, and I do. So yeah. And this was an academic. This was somebody who went to college and who graduated.
They're terrible.
Industrial engineering.
They're horrible. Well, and I'm still going to pause it. I'm going to reiterate myself. I think fundamentally the reason people do that is that they're terrified of the knowledge, because if they have the knowledge, then they need to act on it. So they'll put up any screen they possibly can to avoid getting the knowledge. Sorry.
But also they made shitty decisions, because he took the vax, his wife took the vax.
Yeah, he doesn't want to be responsible for that decision. He does not want to be responsible for that decision.
Yeah, it's for a lot of people. In hindsight, it would be a tough pill to swallow, to admit that you have made your family a fucking guinea pig for a psychotic science experiment. Like, that's something that an absolute moron would do in a world where everyone can communicate truth, and where everyone can truly communicate with one another, where differing viewpoints are allowed to be shared. I think it would be more apparent to people that this is a scientific experiment that's run on guinea pigs.
Well, I think it's the same level. Let's go back to the house on fire. Let's say Nima's house is on fire. He's sleeping. I ring him, and I'm like, dude, your house is on fire. Well, that's just like your opinion, man. And he goes back to sleep. That's kind of what you just described that this friend did, right?
Mm-hmm.
No. Yeah, okay, yeah. So you've got facts, but you got opinions, but you're not entitled to facts, and I'm just not going to listen to this. Clunk.
This is very common.
Yeah.
You get this. Well, whenever you try to talk to people about the COVID nonsense, it's always, but there's all these people dying. There's all these COVID infections. There's all these people who are infected. That we know, right? No, you dipshit. You don't know that. That's my whole point.
Yep.
It's based on instruments, and it's based on biased institutions, and it's based on agendas. It's based on mega corporate funding. It's based on mega corporations who are making money hand over fist, more money than you could ever imagine. It's based on all these biases, all these things, all these flawed humans involved in layer upon layer upon layer of bullshit upon bullshit upon bullshit. It's not, we know this. You think this. You believe this is what you mean to say. But you don't know. You actually know less than, less than most people. Well, no, actually, you know less than nothing, I would say. It's worse than knowing nothing, because you think you know, and you know.
So you block out the good stuff.
Right.
Well, I think that, again, just reiterates the point that this philosophy of nihilism, however you break it up, it's not only is it a poison, it's an effective poison for someone who wants to control, to give to someone who he wants to be controlled, because if that person drinks the poison, they become unable to defend themselves.
Yeah. So let's get back. So this was to the point here. The scientist admits this by restricting himself to the narrowest of specialties, content if he sees a certain coherence in a limited aggregate of facts, without troubling himself over the existence of any truth, large or small. The multitudes demonstrated by looking to the scientist, not for truth, but for the technological applications of a knowledge which has no more than a practical value, and by looking to other irrational sources for the ultimate values men once expected to find in truth. The despotism of science over practical life is contemporaneous with the advent of a whole series of pseudo-religions, revelations. The two are correlative symptoms of the same malady, the abandonment of truth.
Yeah. Amen, brother.
So it almost seems to me like the religious person, when he has faith in God and God's creation, that a creator has put you here
With purpose.
with free will, purpose, with free will, and with a mind that is internal and a world that is external, and with the senses to have the capacity to grasp and understand the world. That person has faith.
A foundation. He can hold on to something. Yeah.
But and he puts his faith in something very much beyond all these layers. He understands, hopefully, that there's these layers and that he's imperfect and needs to examine and question, understand. But I have to find a word for this kind of person now. The modern scientific
Normie.
absolutist normie,
Centrist.
the modern scientific normie puts his faith. He stops with this. He stops with the inquiry much sooner than the religious person. His faith is on a much lower level. His faith is in a person. His faith is in a corporation, in a government agency.
Sounds like the communist revolution right there. The state's God.
Yeah. I mean, it's just, my point is, intellectually, it's on a much lower level than the religious, the faith in God, I think.
I think I agree with you. I mean, we could, if we dive into the realm of theology, we can have another battle there. But I think what you just said is that, I mean, I think I agree with what you just said, which is essentially there's a level of faith that you're taking here, even by saying that you reject faith. You're just putting it on things that really don't deserve it.
Well, the point is that everyone has faith. Everyone operates on faith to some extent. So there's no such thing as having no faith.
There's something coming to my mind, and I'm holding it off right now, just in the thought of time. We're almost at an hour and a half here, Nima.
Yeah.
I don't think I want to jump into Kabbalah and Jewish mysticism and Jewish epistemology that I accidentally bumped into the other week. That was absolutely fascinating at this point. Because we've been at it too long. I think we'll save that for another day. Okay, Nima gave me the slight nod. Well, let's just wrap this up with what we came up with at the beginning with this tweet, right? I want to pull the tweet back up. Let's just read it again.
Mm-hmm.
So here's this girl making this tweet. Unpopular opinion. I don't think your life has to have a purpose or you a grand ambition. I think it's okay to just wander through life finding interesting things until you die. There's a word for this. It's called being lazy. You have a grand metaphysical conception that's wrapped around the fact that you just want to be lazy. So, to anybody listening this, don't be fucking lazy. Get a purpose and get a grand ambition. So, this has been Dylan Moore and Nima Mujur with Irida TV. Hopefully we're not being lazy doing what we're doing right now. And hopefully you're not being lazy just by listening to it. Take this and do something with it. That's what we want with all these damn shows. Take this and do something with it. You can find more of our content at irida.tv. Follow us on the social media of your choice. YouTube, Rumble, Gab, Telegram, whatever. We'll see you over there. And thank you for watching, and we'll see you next time.